Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the United States or in the world. I'm here in sunny Chicago today, and we're going to talk about the integrated form of agreement. So this is the contract we use when we talk about integrated project delivery. And I'm going to explain to you how and why it works and just some of my experiences with it. Feel free to ask questions during the session in the chat window, and they'll be sent over to me so I can answer them in real time if needed. And there's no question that is, that you shouldn't ask. I can basically answer anything you want and drill into anything that has to do with the slideshow. So let's get started here. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm John Zahara with Integrated Facility Solutions. I'm a vice president there. My address, my email address, and my phone number are here. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I can be used as a resource. I've spoken at this conference since it started in 2019, so I'm glad to be back. Wish I was in San Diego like probably everybody else, and hopefully next year we can do that. So that's my contact information, and again, please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions and want to follow up regarding this presentation or really any topic centered around the lean construction world. Just give you a little background on my firm. We're an owner's representative or program manager based in Illinois. And over the 20 plus years of experience, we've had more than 3,000 projects completed, over $3.5 billion of value, most of that in the healthcare market. Probably about 95% of our work has been completed in the healthcare world. And it's very high pressure. I'm sitting in a hospital setting right now in my office, managing projects. That's what I do for my day job. So a lot of experience in healthcare, a lot of experience with this integrated form of agreement contract that we're going to talk about. And so this is just a little bit about us. I put the orchestra conductor on there because I feel like as an owner's representative, that's what we do. We conduct this orchestra that we call construction projects. And one of the ways that we really can conduct it well is by using the integrated form of agreement, which is what we're going to talk about. So let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this. So there's really two major ways to structure this agreement. There is the TriParty Agreement, and we're going to walk through that. And there's also something called a Polyparty Agreement. The TriParty Agreement is what we'll focus on first, and that's really centered around this core team. And that the core team are the members of the group that actually sign one collaborative contract. So in the core team case for the TriParty Agreement, we have an owner, we have an architect, and we have the general contractor. Along with that, we're going to create what we would call the risk-reward pool. And the pool is those members of this group that are putting their profit at risk. So you can see up in the upper corner there, the core team consists of members of both IPD Consultants and IPD Trade Partners that put their profit at risk contractually. So they're going to be tied into the general contractors, trade partners would be, and they're going to be tied in as consultants to the architect. Now, there are also traditional consultants and traditional subcontractors, or I call them trade partners throughout my nomenclature. And they sit outside of the risk-reward pool. And I'll explain kind of who these different parties may or may not be as examples on different projects. But what I want to show is that there's the core team, and then there's this pool of people that sit, and companies that sit within this risk-reward pool that are putting their profit at risk to make sure that the project comes off without fail. So again, we analyze this and we say they're putting their profit at risk. It is a contractual obligation that they put their entire profit at risk, or at least that's what we recommend. The next part is, who are those IPD consultants, right? We know what the architect is, but most of the time, we're going to have a set specified group of people that we want to make sure are putting their profit at risk. And the whole idea behind the profit at risk sector is to really mitigate risk on a project. Who can we have at our table, at our big table, the risk-reward table, that can offer ways to mitigate risk on a project? So you can see here I've listed the mechanical, electrical engineer, the structural engineer, the civil engineer. Those are examples. There's no right answer for a particular project. Now, what I would say is in almost every case, the mechanical and electrical engineer have to be at the table, whether that's one firm or multiple firms. In Chicago, with my company and the work that we do, we hire a mechanical engineer who also does the plumbing and the fire protection, and then we hire an electrical engineer as a separate firm. But that's really up to you. Structural engineers, that there's a line there depending on the type of project. If you're doing an interior renovation of a hospital, you're not going to have a structural engineer, or they're not going to be as integral to the project. If you have a greenfield site, the civil engineer may be really important into that. If there's like a wetland or something that you're trying to protect. So it's really up to you to decide who you want to have in the pool sitting at the table and who you don't. The challenge and what I would talk to the teams about is, let's not make this overcomplicated. Let's keep in only those that we need to, and then let's treat other organizations that are going to need to work on our project as traditional consultants still. They hold a traditional contract between architect, in this case, and that consultant. Let's say we have an acoustic engineer. I listed civil engineer because, again, they can play on either side of that group. Landscape architect is another one where we know we need those services on a greenfield site. The decision-making process that has to happen with a landscape architect may not rise to the level of having them sit in every meeting with all the overhead and all the time that we're going to put towards this and really change the decision-making process that much. Well, the same thing occurs when we jump over now to the core team general contractor side, and we look at who are our IPD trade partners. In this case, I've listed, again, an example of those that could be part of that team putting their profit at risk. We have our steel contractor, our carpentry or drywall, HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, electrical. Those are pretty much the standard bearers for those that are going to participate as IPD trade partners. But you could also have your glazing curtain wall contractor if it's a very large project that has a lot of exterior glass to it. You could have your concrete contractor, depending on the type of structure you're building, steel, concrete, etc. We've actually had, in one circumstance, we had a excavator as part of our IPD trade partner pool. And I think that's very unique. It was a unique project. It required a lot of site work. And the partner came, we've been working with them for a long time, so we had a long-standing relationship with them. But they participated in the profit pool, profit sharing. That means they opened up their books. And anyone that knows excavators knows that that's really not necessarily their modus operandi, but in this case, they did it, and it worked extremely well. Same thing goes here, where you're going to have traditional subcontractors that are outside the pool that don't really need to put their profit at risk in order for the project to be successful. And I think of millwork shops, the site work contractor, for example, other suppliers like your door suppliers, people like that, flooring contractors, painting contractors, any of your specialties, things like that. The painting contract, in most cases, is a very small portion of our overall project value. And so having them put their profit at risk is going to require a lot of work effort on the entire team's part, and I'll show you that in a little while here. And it really doesn't, the payoff and the value proposition really isn't there. And so we don't always include those folks. They're going to be part of our team when it comes to working on the project and working in a collaborative way, but putting their profit at risk seems like a margin that really doesn't need to be there. So that's kind of the formation of who would be a part of this TriParty Agreement. Now, when we flip over, we have the option of doing a Polyparty Agreement. Now, a Polyparty Agreement is going to be a little different because what you can see here is the circle has grown a little bit. Instead of just having an architect, an owner, and a general contractor, the Polyparty it could be many parties. And I listed here an example of what we've done in the past, which is architect, owner, general contractor, but we brought our mechanical electrical engineers to the table and had them sign this agreement with us. Now, we've been working that way for a long time with individual contracts between the owner and that electrical engineer, or owner and that mechanical engineer. And so we felt like having them at the table was extremely important for us. So we brought that forth when we did our integrated form of agreement as a polyparty agreement. You're still going to have potentially IPD consultants as an offshoot of the architect, like our structural engineer and others. And you're going to have general contractor IPD Trade Partners still, like all of the MEPs that we talked about. You could also bring those trade partners and have them sit around this table. So the more people you have sitting around this table, though, the more complex it becomes, because every time we make a change order or do anything that has a decision-making potential, especially when it comes to the finances of the project, this entire team has to sit together and vote on that. And that vote, in our world, needs to be unanimous. And so if we have, let's say, 15 people sitting around this table from all these different IPD trade partners and our vendors and our consultants, if the group gets too large, it becomes potentially unmanageable. And for our projects we've worked on, they've been the right size that this felt like the best scenario. We have done a project where we brought in our electrical, mechanical trade partners and had them signatories to the contract. And it seemed like more trouble really than it was worth. Again, there is a value proposition that we have to weigh out as we go through our analysis. Now, we also note that there are still traditional subcontractors and traditional consultants outside of the risk reward pool. And that's always going to happen no matter what type of project you have. You're never going to have the entire team with all of their risk or all of their profit risks, excuse me. We're just not going to do that. Again, what we're trying to do is lower the level of the water so we can see all the rocks, all the boulders ahead of us. And if we do that with the right makeup of trade partners and consultants, we will see all those issues and create a culture where we can collaborate on the job effectively and not have to have everyone putting their profit at risk and making it just more difficult than it needs to be. So I really like to focus in on this core team a little bit, talk about the relationships between owner, architect, general contractor, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer. And the nice thing about this circle is we all communicate together. There's a question that says, what are you offering these IPD partners to incentivize them to put their profit at risk? Well, the first thing what we're offering is the project itself. And we're offering, typically when we do this, we've worked with these partners for a long time, so they understand our core values, they understand our traditions, they understand where we are in the process. We've probably done GMP work with them in the past, and so what they're being offered is not only the fact that they can be part of this team, but there is a potential incentive that their profit can go up if we make good decisions as a team and we find a shared savings, and I'll show you that in a minute here. So there is an incentive beyond you're going to get to do this job with us, but I think creating a collaborative team, what you'll find is that people that work on these projects, they don't want to work on any other project beyond that. Again, digging into the idea of who these trade partners are that put their profit at risk, same list as I had before. We kind of jokingly call this taxation without representation because they're not sitting at the table with us, but they are there. They're there. They could be there at any time they want to be there. The general contractor is the one that represents that group of contractors. And we feel like the reason why we have this relationship here and not all of these folks signing this contract is that we don't want to spend their time on things that aren't really necessary to them, but they still have this voice and conversation back and forth with the general contractor. We just think that it's sometimes not as beneficial to have 11 signatures on something that has nothing to do with maybe one of these potential contractors. Some of the things that are different and the language that's different about the integrated form of agreement, the first thing I'm going to talk about is this idea of conditions of satisfaction. And the interesting thing about it is that this is something that we develop as an entire team. We put this out there as, what are the expectations for us on this project? For example, I had a project where every decision, the building was going to be used for beneficiaries for a union to go to look at their benefit funds, etc. And the ultimate goal from the owner, one of the owner's conditions of satisfaction, was that anything we do in that building has to be at the benefit of the participants that go there. So we had to make sure that we had to keep that in mind always when we were talking about design changes and things like that. So the conditions of satisfaction lay out this foundation, and then at the end of the project we can look back and say, did we do all the things we said we were going to do? Are we satisfied with how the project turned out? One of the striking conditions of satisfaction that we write into our contracts is on an IFOA is every team member leaves the project satisfied and with a profit. So think about that for a second. We're writing into the contract that we want every team member to generate a profit on this project. Or me as an owner, I feel like I didn't get a good project return. There aren't many contracts, there's really probably no other contract type of its kind that says, I want you to make a profit. And we put it right there on the language, and then we take the conditions of satisfaction, we post them on the wall in our trailers so that everyone knows what our true north goals are for the project. The next thing we're going to talk about is the risk reward pool. So this is the profit that is put into the pool. And I'll show you in a second how this calculation works, but that is, we're basically capturing all the profit from all those people that were inside that big risk reward circle, and we're putting that money into a pool. And depending on where the final actual costs lay out, we may have that incentive. That was that directed to that question here. We may have an incentive where we can actually earn more profit. Or in some cases, if things are really been tough or challenging on the project, we actually may earn a little bit less profit. That's really why we call it a risk reward situation. Some other definitions that are important to remember is the at-risk threshold. So the at-risk threshold is the maximum allowed cost before we start dipping into the risk reward amounts. So if you think about it, there's a top dollar value, and I'll show you this in an example here in a minute. That is called the estimated maximum price. It's the top dollar value. Then we subtract out all of the profit, and when we do, we get to what we would call the at-risk threshold, which is the value that the entire team realizes is if we spend any more than that dollar amount on labor, materials, and overhead, we are going to start dipping into the team's profit. And so we have to be very conscious of that as we start to track our costs. How are we tracking as compared to the at-risk threshold? Along the way, I mean, when you think about conditions of satisfaction, that's that lagging indicator at the end of the job. How did we do? When we go to what are we doing for our leading indicators? We look at key performance indicators, KPIs, and I just put this on here because SMART goals are something that it needs to be measurable. So what we're doing is we're measuring these things on a continual basis, on a weekly basis. How are we doing on our PPC, our plan percent complete? How are we doing on the promises we made that on a daily basis about the work that we were going to perform, and how are we doing against that? How are we doing against our RFI response time, our submittal response time, our injuries? How many injuries do we have on projects? Things like that. We have another question here that says, under the Polyparty, the ability of the architect to direct or collaborate with engineers has been muddy since that may have been a prime member. Does that really work? So under the Polyparty, the collaboration that happens, again, you need to set yourself up for good collaboration and to build a good culture. We have built a very good team culture in our world where the engineers can speak directly to the owner, so can the architect or the contractors, in this case, around the Polyparty circle, but they still have to coordinate with each other. So those organizations know that if there's coordination issues, especially in an IFOA, the entire team is going to pay for it. And so collaboration actually moves to a higher level when it comes to architects and engineers having discussions. But the beauty of it is we're also layering in all of the trade partners and having conversations with the architects and the engineers about how we're designing systems so that we can build them in a better, easier, safer manner. So that actually the waters become less muddy, they become more clear because of the collaborative nature of the contract. Estimated maximum price, I mentioned, this is basically all of the costs for the project. This is the top dollar value. And I made a little asterisk there because it says this occurs before the completion of the planning phase. So when we think about our stage gates of a project, we have our business case, and then we have our traditional stage gates, be schematic design, design development, construction documents, the bidding process, the actual building process, the closeout process. And each one of those has a stage gate defined moment to it. We want to set an estimated maximum price before we really get into that early planning. And I'll have an example later about this idea of validation and the validation period that happens, where we really start to understand what that estimated maximum price is, using good knowledge about the project scope, creating a budget, understanding schedule, and understanding the quality that the project owner wants to build into the process. So we're doing that way early on. We're setting this target line, and then we're saying as a team, that is our dollar value. We're going to design to that dollar value, not the other way around. So our traditional systems would say, design, bid it, figure out what the price is, and then build it. Here, we're pricing it to get to an estimated maximum price. We're designing to that price with that price in mind. This is called target value delivery. And what we're not doing is the value engineering loop that we normally see after a bid process. What we're doing here is we're doing that as we go along. So we're flipping it on its head, and I'll show you an example of how that works in a time frame, a validation time frame from an actual project that I worked on. The incentive threshold, this is where our incentive comes in. So that question about incentive, now how do we do that? The incentive threshold is a dollar value. So if you have the EMP, then you have the at-risk threshold. The incentive threshold is going to fall below that. And what that is our challenge to the team that says if all direct chargeable costs come below this line down here, now we're going to start to save in some profit. And I'll show you that right now. So think about all those terms because they are the differentiators behind a normal GMP contract and how we can get fully to this IFOA contract. So I'll zoom in on this in greater detail, but what I want you to follow is we see the EMP, and then I'm going to show you how it compares to final cost, how we do our incentive calculations, and then how we distribute our risk reward pool. So let's look at each one of these independently. The EMP is going to be all the design fees. Now this is for a Polyparty Agreement. Architect, engineer, for the mechanical side, electrical engineer, general contractor with all its trade partners. And then that last element is the owner's contingency is also put into this pool. That's like the owner putting in their profit into this mix. So the team that we've created, this Polyparty team, helps establish what that contingency should be based on all of the unknowns on the project or risks. We use a risk register or risk log to understand that, and that helps us build a very good, intelligent contingency. So now we have a job that's about $10.5 million for all direct chargeable costs. This is labor, material, overhead, and profit are built into that $10.5 million. When we look at how do we compare our EMP to the final costs on a project. So the EMP gets carried down, 10.5 million approximately, and then we had the at-risk threshold, which if you remember a couple slides back talked about, which is the EMP, and we take out all the profit. So we set the profit aside for a minute. We say, if all direct chargeable costs of the job are above let's say $2 million for round numbers, now we're going to start to dip into the team's profit proportionally. So we got to really keep that $10.2 value in line and really watch it. Then as a team, we challenge ourselves and say, okay, where's the incentive come in? Let's go back to that incentive question for a minute. The incentive threshold in this case, in this example, is the at-risk threshold minus the contingency. So think about that. We put the contingency in to protect us, but now we just took it out and we said if we get direct chargeable costs, labor, material, and overhead on a project that fall below the 8 million, we can now start to share in some incentive and spread that around to the owner and to the team that's working on the project. Anyone that put their profit risk gets something back if we fall below the incentive threshold. Again, it's a challenge to the team that says, if you do a good job and we make really good decisions that are value-based and thoughtful, we could possibly find ways to save costs on this project. In this example, I show about a $9.4 million total final cost, labor, material, and overhead, and a variance of around $400,000. Now, I keep bringing up labor, material, and overhead, so let's think about direct chargeable costs for a minute. Labor and materials we know about. Overhead is really what does it cost your company to stay in business as a percentage of your work. And we want to pay overhead on a consistent basis because we want companies to stay in business. We know that profit has to come and drop to the bottom line, but we want to keep overhead paid, and we've made the guarantee as the owner signing that agreement that we're going to pay your overhead to make sure you stay in business. You keep the lights on, you can pay all your bills, you pay your utilities, etc. We want to make sure that you do that. So let's go. All right, so now we have a variance. We have $400,000 we saved on this project. Like, good job, right? Congratulations to all of us. What do we do with that? We start to look at incentive calculations. This is just one example of how you could set up your incentive calculation. So we're going to look at the first $100,000, the risk reward members are going to get 35% of that, and the owner is going to get 65%. And the reason why I do that is I challenge the team, says, you know what? The first 100,000 is easy in a project like this, right? We could save 100,000 if we saved a few work days on the site with figuring for every man and woman on site, it's $1,000 per day. So it's not that much it's not that many work days before I've saved $100,000. The second 100,000, now this is incremental. So the second 100,000 goes to a 50-50 split. So what you would have is if we save $200,000, the team would get 85 and the owner would get 115. The next batch is 200 to 500,000, and you can see the partners get 65, the owner gets 35. Now, I cap it. We always set a cap on the final shared savings. Let's say I didn't set a cap and we saved $2 million on this project. Something would tell us that we did something really wrong. We're not going to build a $10 million project for $8 million. That means we didn't get the proper value out of the project. So we can't do that. But what we can do is we can set our cap at what we thought was a logical number, $500,000. So you see here, the partners get $196,000 in an extra profit. The owner takes back $174,000 plus their contingency. So at the end of the day, the owner is taking back about $600,000 to do with what they please. Typically, that's going to fall into the bottom pool and go back to the bottom line for other projects to get funded. And that $196,000 is going to get split up between the team. So we can see here the distribution. I don't need to go through all the numbers, but what it tells you is that it's proportional. So based on how much profit you put in, there's a percentage that you follow. So in this case, the architect accounted for about 5% of the overall initial profit pool. We're adding money to their profit pool of the $196,000 at again that 5.22% clip. So in essence, they've almost doubled their profit on a project like this. That's incentive, but it's not profit. We're not profit driven. This is the output of good hard work. I think, there's not a lot to this slide, and there really doesn't have to be. The beauty of the contract is that it offers the best way to collaborate. And folks that have done work with this contract say they never want to do anything else. They find that this is the best way to collaborate. We're bringing the team in early on in the process, as early as possible. As we validate the project, after the business case scenario, we bring a team in. We're getting validation. We're doing problem solving at an extremely high level. We're lowering the water to see those rocks, see those boulders way out there, account for those issues, solve them before we get there, maneuver around them, do whatever we have to do to get rid of that issue and solve the problem. We're reducing waste at a drastic amount. Like I said, if we saved $100,000, that's 100 work days on site. So if you have 10 people working on a site for 10 days, right? I think I did the math on that correctly. We've saved that amount of time, 2 weeks. That's all. It's really not a lot of time, but we've saved a significant amount of money. Take that, put it towards the front of the project when we do our planning. And now we've created something that's incredibly special. We've created this team with a culture of problem solving, a team that sits there and says, I want to help you. So if we see the plumber having issues on the project, the team is there to say, how can we help the plumber get back on track? It's not about, well, let's forget that guy. We're going to keep going, bury him. That's not our philosophy. And then this idea of being open book and transparent, we lay out there profit, overhead, labor rates, material rates. So that's why it works. Question here is, has this structure worked with lenders involved in a project, giving that lenders like that one entity that is wrapping the entire deal? So I think the question there is really around a lender is saying, how much money are we going to outlay for a project like this? And I think what we would find is that lenders, if we tell them up front the project will be guaranteed to cost this or less, there shouldn't be any problem with that. We still deal with waivers of lien like we do on every other project. Everyone has their own insurance like every other project. All of those things are still realized, so we have a cross protection between all of the members of the organization that comes together to form this contract. But what we are doing is putting this concept of collaboration into our contract language, which is why this contract works and is so beautiful. So I think lenders would have no problem with this because they want to know what that estimated maximum price is, whether we're dealing with a GMP or a lump sum project or whatever it might be. But what isn't in here is this is not an open-ended number that you just get to make up whatever you want. We are signing this number way early on in the process. And my last example, really, I talked about this earlier, is about this idea of validation. So on an example project, 24 months would be our total duration for a project around $30 million. This is to renovate 4 floors of an office building and then add 3 extra floors on top of it. So in the traditional process, that takes us about 9 to 11 months to design it. We're going to bid it. We're going to look at budgeting and everything else. And then I added in a value engineering loop. And the reason why I did that was because typically we have that somewhere along the way. And most often that is used as a scope reduction philosophy, not what true value engineering is. That total duration adds up to about 13 to 15 months. If you look at design fees, we could be in the $5 to $6 million range, and we're creating a lot of wasted time by going back and value engineering, potentially redrawing or redesigning, going back out and getting extra bids. And at a 24-month project cycle, now I have, 8 months to build the project. In a lean process, if I onboard the team within the first 2 months of the project, once I know I have a business case for it from the client, I understand the program. That takes another 2 months. And I've done my validation study where we look at the program, we look at costs, we start to apply dollars in buckets to the different things that we're sitting around the table. And we're using good thought with our trade partners involved. In a 5-month period of time, I've spent about $500,000, so 1/10 of the dollar amount in 1/3 the time. And now I can get a true understanding of this budget. And what I mean by that is this project, for this example project, actually happened in real life. After that validation period, we came back and said that budget should actually be $60 million. Imagine if you had found out about that after 15 months and $5 to $6 million of design and bidding and value engineering. Now we got a real big problem on our hands compared to, and we still have a problem, but what we have is something that's manageable. Now I have 19 months to go solve this problem and build the project if I use the lean process of that with validation. This contract and this client signed an IFOA. They went through that process. We helped coach them on that. And in 5 months, we knew that we had an issue. And now the client has the time to take a breath and go back and see if that $60 million budget or some number between 30 and 60 is what they're actually wanting to spend on a project like this. So they have the real good time to look at their business case and support it. That's why this works. The proof is in the pudding. It's right here. This is why this contract works so well, is because we get teams on board and we do the work together instead of in silos. That's the end of the presentation. Here's my contact information. Again, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We've participated in these contracts. I believe in these contracts. I believe that you can do IPD work without this contract, but this is still such a great way to do business. There's a question in here, and I can answer that before we go here, which is architects still need time to design. Where is that time on the lean process? Let me go back here. The design time takes place after this validation study. There's still design time in here. But what I was trying to indicate with this is after 15 months, I realized that this budget should be $60 million. And I haven't done all this design work in order for that to occur. What I did do was, with my architects and my engineers and my trade partners and contractor, I really understood the program from the client. And within a month after that, so 5 months into the project process, I had a dollar value that said, this is a $60 million project. That doesn't mean that we're not going to go back. We're not going to go and actually engineer it and architecturally design it and everything else. We're going to have to do all that. But I got to an answer much sooner, 5 months in, not 15 months in. Now I have the time to actually spend to do the proper design work. So the design work all begins after this arrow here. But what's beautiful about it from a team perspective is I didn't spend 10% of the project cost to find out I had a real big issue. I spent 1%. So now I'm in a much better position starting off from here than I was at this point here. So hopefully that answered that question. If there are any more, I can stick around. I can join the other chat session. Or again, like I said, please feel free to reach out to me. I can be a resource for you. And I just love talking about this stuff. So hopefully you'll join us tomorrow. There's a bunch more presentations. I'll be participating in one about the construction process from the owner's perspective. So take care and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.